This is Dan Douthart. You may have seen me doing turning videos. I went to the scroll saw meeting back last July to run the camera, and Hans has a boomerang box where if your number is drawn, you get what's in the boomerang box, and then you need to make something and bring it back next month. Well, Hans forced a ticket in my hand with no option to decline, and naturally he drew my number. So I had to come up with something to scroll saw for the next meeting. Well, that was the title of that program in July was Christmas in July, where they were doing all sorts of scroll saw ornaments. And I was really taken by these ornaments were 3D ball globe type ornaments here. There was a bunch of different type of ornaments, but this type here sort of interested me, where it was a scroll saw an ornament, and it was done in 3D, where you start out with a pattern. These are a pattern, not this pattern here, but there were patterns like this published in Scroll Saw magazine, and they were made to fit on a 1 3/4 inch block of wood, and then you would take that pattern and fold it in half, and then attach it to your block of wood like that, and then you would scroll saw the pattern through this side, and then scroll saw the pattern through this side, and then eventually then cut the outline out. And I thought that was pretty nice, but I didn't really care for the square corners on there. I thought, well, that'd look a lot better if the corners are rounded from the lathe. So my goal was to make a pattern, an ornament, something like this, that's the same sort of pattern, but the outside is rounded by shaping the outside pattern on the lathe instead of scroll sawing it like this one's done here. So that started my adventure of doing the scroll sawing. And I've had a scroll saw probably for 25 years, but I don't consider myself a scroll sawer. I use the scroll saw primarily for just cutting out small pieces for other projects. I started out using the patterns that were published, and I can't remember what the lady's name was that had published these in Scroll Saw magazine, but there was something like this, and this was my first attempt. And you can see here, from a 1 3/4 inch block of wood, by the time I got the flat side of the ornament turned, the corner pieces were gone because the block of wood was too small. So I said, well, I need to get a larger block of wood, and to retain using the same pattern to retain, so I don't lose those elements there on the corners. So I thought, well, then I calculated that I'd probably need about 2 1/4 inch size block of wood. So that's what I did. Using the same sort of patterns, I used a 2 1/4 inch block of wood, and it was really a struggle for me. I think the scroll saw stroke is about 2 inches, and it just did not like cutting through that block of wood that was 2 3/4 inches thick. And you can see there that my cuts are very rough, and I just wasn't very pleased with the way that was coming out. And one of the problems that you run into, or I was running into, was that I would cut from here down to that point, and then come over here and cut down to that point down there. Well, I'd have the point on the top side, but then you look on the bottom side, that piece of wood would not come out because it wasn't meeting the scroll saw blade was not running true straight down through the block of wood. So I was getting very ragged points. The cuts were very ragged, and I just wasn't pleased at all with the results that I was getting. So I was just about ready to give up on the whole idea when I remembered some other turning that I'd done, where instead of having a solid block of wood, I'd cut it into quarters, like here. This is the same size block of wood as this, but instead of dealing with the block solid like that, I can deal with 1 quart at a time. So that's what I decided to try doing. And again, with the patterns here not being a center line, you would need to cut the pattern in half, and it was sort of a guesswork as to get it exactly in half, measured in half. So I ended up doing my own patterns. And we'll have another segment on how I develop these patterns using DeltaCAD. So we'll go ahead and continue on here, assuming that we've got the patterns already made. And what I did is I came up with patterns using DeltaCAD. I was able to come up with a pattern, something like that, printed out so I've got center lines. And then I could cut the pattern. I could precisely cut the pattern. When I mount the pattern on the block of wood, my bottom line is an alignment point, and the center line is an alignment point. So those two cuts need to be very accurately done, so I can glue it on the block of wood accurately. So let's step back a little bit about my block of wood, about preparing the blocks of wood. I try to, when I get my block of wood, and now all this wood that I'm using here is just regular 2x4, and I cut the pieces out of a single block of wood that's all lined up. So I'll cut a block of wood on the table saw that's about that long, and get it cut to being this, to end up with a 1 3/4 inch block of wood. I cut these at 7/8 of an inch. So I'll get the wood prepared at 7/8 inch square with the length that I need, and then I'll chop them up into lengths. And the lengths I believe was about 2 inches. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Did a paper. The paper covers everything that I've done here, or will be covering in these ornaments. If you'd like to have a copy of this, just send me an email to GWA-Turner. It's GWA, Gwinnett Woodworkers Association, -Turner at hotmail.com. And I will send you a link then that you can download the file from the internet. The size of these blocks of wood are in the paper, and I can't remember exactly what the sizes are right now. But anyway, I cut it out, and then when I got the pieces cut, I will take them like this. I want to keep the joining, as many of the joining edges connected that I can, so that the grain matches up. Now let me go ahead and I'll get these repositioned the way I want them, and then I'll explain. And what I'm looking for, and that's not showing a very good example here. We'll do on this one. What I'm looking for is sort of a star pattern with the grain coming out to the corners like that. And what that does, when you have the grain coming out like that, what you get, your end result then is the bottom of the ornament, the bottom and top of the ornament is going to have a star pattern, or a radiating pad. The grain pattern is going to be radiating out from the center, and then the grain lines on the faces of the ornament will be vertical. So that's what I'm looking for, is the grain of the wood. I just like that pattern that I get. So I will lay the blocks, I'll connect them together so that I get the pattern oriented the way I want it, and then I will mark I'll just put a little diagonal line across the inside corners of each of the blocks, and I'll number the blocks from 1 through 4, starting from the upper right quadrant and going around clockwise and marking them. So then if they get misplaced or knocked over, I can always put them back in the order that I had originally wanted. So that's how I prepare the blocks of wood, and then we'll go ahead and attach those pattern pieces to the wood. So let me just go ahead and cut one out here. And so, like I said, the side patterns are not really critical. And actually, this is 7/8 of an inch, so I'm going to cut it inside the line, because when I tape it on the block of wood, I want a little bit of a bare spot of the wood. So when I tape it down, I've got a little bit of wood there for the tape to stick to. So I'm going to cut inside the lines on the sides. And on the top is, I can cut inside the line on the top also a little bit, and on the side, inside the line. So, but the real critical line is this bottom line. That's what I'm going to be using to align the pattern on the block of wood. So I want to cut that very precisely on that line. And then the next important line is the center line, because I want to use that to line up the edge on the block. So I want to cut that very precisely in the center. So when I get that cut, pick one of these blocks here. So I've got them lined up in the order that I want them to be. I'm just going to take two of the pieces of wood that fit together and lay them down on the bench like that, and then take the pattern as I cut them apart and lay them right on there like that. And now I don't have to worry about getting them on the right side of the right face of the wood, oriented in the proper direction. So then I just use my one thing is, I take some blue painter's tape, and I'm working on a piece of glass here as a flat surface, and also when I'm doing my gluing, I can just easily scrape it off with a razor blade and not have to worry about messing up my workbench. So I just put a piece of tape down on the workbench like that, and I'll come along with a X-Acto knife and just slice down through the center. And then I'll come across ways and make strips about a quarter of an inch wide. Okay, and then I'll get my pattern lined up, and I just use my fingers. Just by feel. I want to line the pattern up on the bottom and on the inside edge so that it's flush. Then once I get it like that, I'll just come over and just use the knife and peel underneath a piece of that tape and grab a piece of tape, and then put it on the block like that and rub it down. And I'll do the same thing over on the other side, other half. And just by feel, you can feel that paper that you just want to line it up right on the edge of the wood. And I want to use my fingernail. I want to get a good seal right there, because I'm going to use this piece of tape as a hinge to fold the pattern back when I put the glue on. And the tape is going to hold the pattern. I've got the pattern aligned, and then I'm going to use the tape to hold that pattern in alignment while I'm putting the glue on, so that I can double check and make sure that my I don't have any gaps in there, and I've got a good alignment. I've got the blocks of wood aligned, and I've got a good alignment on my pattern pieces there. So the glue that I'm using is a glue stick. This happens to be Elmer's extra strength glue stick. So I just fold the pattern piece back, and then just apply the glue to the wood. And then fold the pattern back down. And I just press it in place. A little bit of a rub on it. And then wipe off any excess glue, because I found out if I don't wipe the excess glue off, I put the blocks back together, the blocks get glued together then. I'll put it on this other side. Okay, and then I let that glue set for a time. Typically I'll just let it set overnight, and I'll scroll saw it the next morning. But I'll go around the blocks of wood. Once I got that face on, then I rotate the blocks of wood to get one more time, lay those two down, cut another pattern out, lay them down, and then just continue on until I get the patterns, all the way around the block of wood. This is the size of block of wood if I'm going to completely scroll saw it and end up with an ornament that looks something like this. That would be this. I would use the block of wood that's based on the original 1 3/4 inch size with 7/8 inch individual blocks. Well, when I take that same pattern and I want to turn it on the lathe to finish it on the lathe, then I will start out. I need a block that's got a finish size of this size, so I will start out with 1 1/8 inch individual squares or individual quarters. And attach the same pattern to those pieces, and then that extra width gives me room to, when I turn it, then I don't turn away the corners, and then the bit up here just gives me extra room to hold it in the lathe. So that's the size block of wood that I would use, using that same pattern to turn to do one of them I'm going to finish on the lathe and turn. And then once I started doing that, I saw I was using this size block of wood, and it was cutting nicely on the scroll saw. I thought, well, why not make a larger scroll sawed ornament? So then I designed some patterns that was a larger size that would fit this block of wood, that's a larger pattern, and produce a larger ornament. So here's the ornament size that was for the original 1 3/4 inch square block of wood, and then this is the ornament size that's big, that will work on the larger 1 2 1/4 inch size block of wood. So then I just went into Delta CAD and modified my pattern and just made a larger pattern. And if you feel comfortable, scroll sawing thicker wood than the than the 1 1/8. Like for example, if you can comfortably scroll saw the original pattern size of 1 3/4, you could do quadrants of that size, glue 4 of those together, and make a pattern, make a ornament that would be, probably about 3 inches across. You can just make a bigger pattern and make much larger pattern, make much larger ornaments that are completely scroll sawed than what you could do from a solid block of wood. We're here in my shop. We normally do our videos in Peachtree Woodworking in the classroom over at Rob's shop. And in both locations they have the DeWalt scroll saw, which is a very popular scroll saw nowadays. I first got introduced to scroll sawing probably 25 or maybe 30 years ago. Back at that time, the scroll saw that you saw advertised in the scroll saw magazines was the RBI or the Hegner. And my brother-in-law had bought a RBI saw, and I went to his house one day and saw the stuff he was cutting. And at that time I had a little Delta 2-speed saw, which was very vibrated all over the place and very noisy. And I saw my brother-in-law's RBI saw, and I figured, well, I've got to have one of those. So we went to the state fair in Iowa and hung around the booth where they was doing their RBI demonstrations, and I ended up coming home with an RBI scroll saw. So I feel more comfortable using this scroll saw, even though I don't scroll saw a lot. I just like using this scroll saw better than I do using the DeWalt, or I'm just not so familiar with the DeWalt scroll saw. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this part of the video here in my shop, is because I just feel more comfortable using my scroll saw. Okay, I've got my block of wood. I got patterns glued up to the sides, and I've taken, in this case, just taken the one, and I've drilled a starter hole. And what I typically do is I'll put the starter holes on opposite sides of the center line. So if you try to drill the starter hole there and a starter hole here, you'd end up clogging up one of the other hole, the first hole that was drilled. You'd end up getting it clogged up. So I drill a starter hole here so they don't intersect each other and there's no conflict between them. So we'll go through the steps of cutting out the one quadrant, and then you'd repeat the same steps on the other 4 quadrants. So we'll get it set up. We'll do that inside cut first. So I got the block mounted in here, and this is another little tip that I got from Hans. It's, you got the knob over here. It's hard to get enough tension on it to hold the blade. Before I started using this, I would be cutting along and the blade would slip out because it wasn't getting enough tension on that screw to hold the blade in place. But it's just a little block of wood that's cut out to fit over the knob, and then it's got a little rare earth magnet. It's always right there handy for you to grab with that rare earth magnet on there. Okay, so I got the saw blade threaded through the starter hole, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut across to here, and I like cutting this inside bit first because I find it easier, if I got the resistance of the wood, I find it easier to come around and make it around that corner, as opposed to if I cut this side first here, when I'm trying to come around the corner, it's going to try to cut out or not stay on that line. So I'm going to come in here first, cut down to this inside that's got a much sharper radius here, and then I'll back the blade up out of there and then come over to this side and cut down like that, and then I'll remove that piece of wood out, and then I'll do the same thing down there. And that's one of the problems I was having. Let me go back. The reason I'm doing cutting down from the 2 sides like that, I want to have a nice crisp point right there at that point, where if I came down here and did the turn, you could do the turn on the blade, but you're not going to have a nice sharp crisp point there. It's going to be rounded out a bit. And that's one of the problems I was having when I was trying to cut through the full thickness of the 1 3/4. I would have the points meet here on the top surface, but they wouldn't be meeting on the bottom surface, and the piece wouldn't come out, and I'd fuss it around, trying to wiggle it, get the bottom piece cut to where it would pop out, and then it would end up messing up the joint there. So I find I can make a much crisper, more accurate cuts on these smaller quartered size blocks of wood. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get it started here. Okay, I'm going to come down. Now I don't want to come straight in like that, because when I back it out, it'd be hard to make that corner. So I'm going to sort of gradually work my way in. Okay, now Oftentimes when I see scroll saw demonstrations, you'll see the scroll sawer say, well, the lines are just sort of a suggestion. If you don't follow the lines, you're the only one that's going to know that the lines aren't where the cut or not where the lines were. Well, when you take these pieces of wood here and you put them back together, if your cuts are not precise, when you put it back together, you're going to have a step there and a step here, and anybody's going to see it and see that it's not cut correctly. So when I'm cutting this, I want to stay just to the inside of that line, or cut about half the line away. I don't want to wander across the other side. So what we'll see when you're doing the DeltaCAD demonstration, you'll see how I'm using the finest line that I can make with the pattern. So I'm going to be cutting, not letting the blade go more than halfway over, but typically just following along the inside of that line. And when I get down here at the end, I just sort of slow down. I stop pushing because I don't want it to snap over and mark up the other side that I just cut. And then once I've got it free, then I just come back and just sort of nibble away and get a nice sharp juncture there in the center. Now sometimes you can back up there and see how it popped that out. If you back it up into the side and just sort of touch the side, it just oftentimes just pops that piece right out, and you don't have to stop the saw. Again, I'm going to slow down there and stop pushing and let the saw cut through, and then I'm going to just come back and just nibble away to get a nice entrance into that corner. Okay, so that's, then we're going to then we'll cut this bit out here. Now I'm sorry, we'll do the other inside bit, get both the inside cuts done. That's another benefit of having the quadrants like this. with being a solid pattern, this would be an inside cut over here also. So I've eliminate that one inside cut by doing it this way also. That's another benefit of doing this. Yep. Again, I'm going to slow down there and let the saw catch up, and then come back and clean it up. Now I can't flip it out there since it's got the two separate pieces in it now, so you have to sort of stop it and get those out. I've got a foot switch down here to turn the saw on and off, so you don't see me reaching up to turn anything off. Okay, so that's it for the inside cut. Oh, and the saw blade I'm using here is they're Flying Dutchman blades, because you know the scroll sawers in the group, they really recommend the Flying Dutchman blades. I had been using some other blades. I had some blades that came with the RBI saw and some other blades that I got from another location. And when I first started this project, I was having some troubles, and I decided to go ahead and try the Flying Dutchman blades. And what I'm using here now, I started out with a number 7 Polar blade, and it was working okay. And then I tried the Ultra Reverse, and I believe I liked the number 7 Ultra Reverse better. So that's what I'm using now, is the number 7 Ultra Reverse. So now I'm going to get this the inside bit here cut out. Now I could just start here and cut all the way around, but this being a sharper corner here, I want to control the entry cut there and entry cut there, so that when I put the two pieces together, they line up good. So if I came around like this, it would be two things. I would get a little bit of tear out along this corner, plus it'd be hard to come around that sharp corner and exit exactly where I want to exit. So what I do instead of that is I will start here and come up, cut in here, get up here to where it's somewhat flat, and then I'll back out, and then I'll come here, and I can match up with where those two line up easier. And then if there's a little bit of a gap there, I've got a flat surface that I can easily sand that away, but I can much more precisely control the entry points here by coming in from both directions instead of trying to cut all the way through and exiting out over there. So I'll start over here on this side. And again, when I come down to where it's close to being cut off, I don't want to push it and let the saw blade not cut straight through. So I'm going to just ease up and go very slowly there, and let it find its way. And you see there, I got a very, very, very good joint between those two, and I can easily just come through there with a bit of sandpaper and clean that up. So we'll do the other thing on the other face. But if I was doing it on the lathe, such as this block is set here, I don't cut the pattern up there. I just cut the bits here and there, and then the outside profile will be shaped on the lathe. So the line is there because I'm using the same pattern for both applications. But when I'm doing it on the lathe, that's all the farther I got a scroll saw when I'm doing it for the lathe. So then we'll finish up and cut through here. Now, I want to have a nice little knob on the top of the ornament, so I want to have a nice crisp joint right there. So if I came in there and tried to make a turn, I would mess up that joint there. So what I'm going to do is on both sides, I'm just going to come in here and cut down to there on both sides, and then I'll come back and I'll come in and meet at that point right there. And I'll just pause there a little bit to make sure that the blade is caught up on the bottom and running perpendicular, and then I'll back it out. Do the same thing over here. Okay, then we come through and cut the outside profile here. Again, when I'm getting close to the end there, I sort of ease up and slacken off on the pressure and let the saw blade catch up and just ease up to that point there where it just comes apart. Okay, so now I need to cut the other profile, but since my pattern is gone, I've got to attach these two pieces back together to cut that profile. I'll get some tape. Okay, so I need to connect those back together so I can cut this profile here. Here's my piece that I'm going to end up with, but my pattern's stuck here, so I've got to glue the tape, fasten those back together. So what I do is I'll just lay it down and put some tape across there. Okay, I'll just put a piece on this side for the time being, because when I come in, if I put the piece of tape across there now, as soon as I cut through here, it would cut through that piece of tape. So I'm going to just get the holes, get it started, and then I'll come back and put the piece of tape across there to hold it all together for me while I'm cutting this other profile. stop it there and then take my piece of tape and put it across there. So there's our piece of wood for our ornament. The scroll sawers in Gwinnett Woodworkers like to refer to the turners as wood wasters. You tell me, who's wasting wood here? Okay, another benefit of doing it in quadrants like this is I've got access to these inner bits here to sand them if I need to touch anything up. Where if this is a solid block of wood, it's really difficult to get in there in those inside bits to sand them. But with like this, I have access to get in there and sand those places. If I need to touch up anything, I can sand it. So I have access to get in there and clean those things up, which I see as an advantage. Now I say I'm using pine on here, so if you're using a harder wood, maple or some other wood, you'd probably get a lot cleaner cuts than what this is. But there's our from one quadrant. So then the next step is to glue them together. Okay, we're back over on the workbench working on my glass work surface for gluing the pieces together. So we got our there's the four pieces that cut out for the smaller ornament, and then this is to be the pieces then if you wanted to do the same sort of pattern on a 2 1/4 inch size block of wood to give you a bigger ornament. And one thing I forgot to mention over there on the scroll saw, as I cut those pieces out, you remember I had the blocks numbered. I had determined what my grain pattern, how I wanted that grain pattern to be, and I'd numbered the blocks. As I cut each one out, I number it. There's real faintly, so you can see I marked the number 1 there on both those corners. I marked the number 2 on both of those corners, so I can when I get to this stage, I know how to put them together. And remember the 2 is in this quadrant, and the 1 is in this quadrant, so then I know that those 2 pieces need to go together like that. Now this block of wood is not a good example of the pattern that I'm looking for. The block of wood that I cut this from didn't have the grain oriented to where I could get it diagonally across a block of the wood, so this is not going to come out the same as what I would like. But I'll go through the steps and show you how I glue those together. Now this is kiln dried wood, but once you start cutting it up, you're going to release stresses, and it's not going to necessarily stay square. But when on the pieces like this, it's not that critical. As long as you just look at them and see if as long as you got a good match, a good mating surface there with no gaps, you can let it go as like that, and just go ahead and glue those pieces together. And when I do that, I'll just put some glue out here on the piece of glass. And I'm using the Type Bond original glue for this. And I want to clean off any dead dried stuff in there, because I don't want a chunk of that dry glue to be getting in there and preventing me from getting a good solid contact. So just squeeze a little bit of glue out there on the glass. And I've got a bamboo skewer, and just to put a little bit of glue on there, I'm just going to put some glue on one surface. And one of the guys in our club likes to use a lot of glue. Well, this application here, you don't really want to use a lot of glue, because it makes it harder to clean up later. So once I get the glue applied, to get the glue distributed evenly, I'm going to put it together and just rub out. And if I start and rub here, if there was any little fibers there, you could drag those fibers into your joint and cause it not to have a good surface, a good mating surface. But once I get the glue distributed, then I put it down on the glass and I rub it back and forth until the glue starts to tack up. And just using some hand pressure, just press them together until the glue starts to tack. And then once the glue is tacked, get them positioned where you want them. And I'm going to go get in here and clean up now. I'm going to clean up the excess glue. I recently had a segmentation class with Mark Wanninger, and he explained that this excess glue is moisture, and that moisture will cause the wood fibers to swell. And then once it dries out, the wood fibers will shrink back again, and that's when you start getting cracks, is when the wood fibers start to shrink. So you want to remove all the excess glue that you can get to so it doesn't swell the wood fibers up. So using this Q-tip, I can get in there and just clean up and get out any squeeze out that I find in there. Just clean all that out with the little Q-tip, or keep saying Q-tip on the bamboo skewer. So that side looks pretty good there. So let's set that aside. And then we'll do the same thing here. We'll get, again, I'll get the positioned or correctly. I've got number 3 and number 4, which just gives me that proper orientation. And I'll glue those together. I'll position them together correctly. I've got blocks 3 and 4, giving me the proper orientation of how those are together. And I'll glue those up using the same method. And then double check, make sure I got the proper orientation. And I'll just rub them back together to get the glue distributed. And once I get good glue distributed, got the glue evenly distributed, then I put them down again. Some excess glue. Just rub them back and forth until the glue starts to tack. And then clean up the excess. It's not tacking correct. Okay, and you set those aside, and it doesn't take very long for them to dry. These pieces here don't seem to stick quite as quickly as what the demonstration that Mark showed us. He was gluing up some segmented pieces, and he did the same sort of thing. Of course, there's a little bit larger glue surface of what he was doing, and he would rub them back and forth, and then set them aside. And then he picked up 2 more pieces and glued them, and did the same thing, glued them together. And one of the audience members says, "Well, how long do you have to let that set?" Well, he picked that piece up that he had just glued together, not 10 seconds earlier, and gave it to the guy and said, "Well, here, see if you can take them apart." And the guy could not break them apart. The glue set that quickly by using that pressure of rubbing them together until you start feeling the glue start to stick together. Position it, and you don't need clamps, and it really works well. So we'll let this sit together for a while, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I flatten them. I was telling them that they're not. Even though it's kiln-dried wood, you may not have a good mating surface there, and I'll show you how I flatten those. But we'll need to let those dry for a bit. Okay, we've let this sit with glue a while. I told you I was working on a glass surface here. One of the nice things about that, you remember I had that glue spread out there on the glass. I wiped up the excess, and I got a razor blade and a scraper, and it's easy. You just go along and just scrape off the dry glue and refresh your work surface. Makes it very, very nice to work on, and it's a flat surface too. Now, as I said, this is kiln-dried wood, but once you start cutting bits out of it, cutting it into even just the quadrants, you may not end up with after you glue this together. You may these aren't. You can see just a slight bit of rocking there where they're not fitting together completely. So this is another thing I got from Mark Wanninger was I got a piece of MDF, a flat surface. I've just some PSA back. I'm using 100 grit sandpaper because that's what I had. You could, for this small of ornament here, you could use a finer grit sandpaper than that. But what I want to do is just rub it on there until I get a good flat surface. And the way I tell if I got a flat surface, I'll just take a pencil and just put some lines across the face that I'm going to be sanding. And then I'll just rub it across. I'm not going to rub it back and forth because you could end up rocking it. So we'll just take it, I'm going to rub it in one direction. And I'm gripping it pretty much in the center. You can see that all my pencil lines are gone. So we'll do the same thing to the other piece. Okay, so once we get the mating surface there, apply the glue to the surfaces just like we did previously. Rub them back and forth until the glue starts to tack up. Using the bamboo skewer, so you can get with the fine point, you can get in there and clean out any excess glue, and then you let that dry. I've got one here that's already dried, and what I do is I use eye screws. They're available from Peachtree Woodworking. I think they're about $1.99 for a pack of 100. So I use those eye screws, and I've got a numbered drill bit that's the proper size for that eye screw thread. I can't tell you what size it is, but I just mark the center. I use the numbered drill bit held in a pin vise, and then just manually drill the hole in there for the eye screw, and then insert the eye screw. And there you have a completed scroll sawed ornament. Thank you for watching.